My name is Taz Ahmed. I am coming to you all from Los Angeles. It's very hot here. I'm standing right next to my air conditioning, so if it's a little loud, I apologize. Thank you for attending the session. You are in Designs on Democracy at Netroots Nation 2020. We've done this panel a couple times in the past, different variations of it, so I'm excited to be able to bring this back with this amazing group of people. I'm just so sad that I'm unable to be in person with everyone this year, but hopefully it's just so good to see these faces. I don't know, this pandemic is a lot. But I am excited about design. We've always known how important visuals are to get people's attention on issues and move them to act. But in this pandemic, when suddenly so many people are sheltering in place, and people are relying on screens, we realize how important design is. As artists and as media makers of color, we know the importance when it comes to the responsibility of design to our communities, particularly with representation and cultural competency. And we know that our communities are the ones that are most marginalized when it comes to the democratic process. My name is Taz Ahmed. I'm an electoral organizer, artist, and writer in Los Angeles. Over the past 20 years, I've been turning out Asian and South Asian voters, and I've always played at the intersection of pop, politics, and art to get people to turn out to vote. I'm excited to jump into this conversation with a fantastic panel of artists, designers, and activists about designing in this crucial moment. So I'm going to read all the bios, and then we're going to kick it off because I think it'll be a little bit easier than going back and forth given the Zoom setup. So first of all, we have Sabia Basrai. Sabia is a Muslim American woman and is a member of the Design Action Collective. The handle is in the chat. A worker-owned cooperative dedicated to serving social justice movements with art, graphic design, and web development. She is also coordinator of the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, where she works with racial justice organizers to fight against Islamophobia, and serves on the advisory board for the Center for Political Education. Next, we have Anthony Rogers Wright, currently serving as a policy coordinator for the Climate Justice Alliance, and he has over 10 years of policy analysis, community organizing, and outreach and advocacy experience. He has used his organizing and outreach experience to advocate for a variety of social justice campaigns, including environmental justice, affordable healthcare access, income inequality, and civil rights for LGBT citizens. Next, we have Yash Mori, who is a South Asian American organizer whose body of work has been focused on uplifting the passionate and inspiring stories of leaders. Yash has worked on with organizations for the likes of Hillary for America, People's Climate March, Democratic Governors Association, Latino Victory Fund, United We Dream, Unite Here, and Netroots Nation, and more. And last but not least is Candice Deon. I don't know how to say your last name, Deon. Candice is a Filipina woman born in Hawaii. Started off organizing as a summer organizer for OFA in 2009, and is now an award-winning vice president of creative for 50+1 Strategies, a consulting firm based in Oakland, California. In 2019, she was honored by the AAPC as a top 40 under 40 winner, and she specializes in print design and has won several national awards for her logo, billboards, and mailer designs. So thank you to this amazing panelist. I feel like every year the bio keeps getting better and better for folks. And there's also so many, I know you all, so I know there's so much more missing. Definitely look up all these folks, amazing people, just on cutting edge work. And to kick us off, I'm gonna throw it to Sabiha.
Thanks, Taz, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So as Taz mentioned, I'm a member of Design Action Collective located in Oakland, California. We're a cooperative of 10 folks dedicated to serving social justice movements with graphic design and web development and messaging strategy. And I just wanted to take a couple minutes, and Taz, please give me a warning if I hit the 4-minute mark so I don't take too much time, because I could talk about this stuff forever. Just kind of our philosophy and approach to this work, and share one case study. So Design Action is made up of organizers and activists who do this work inside and outside of the kind of creative design office. And we've really been intentional about building a team that is made up of folks who are have insights on the front lines of this work. And when I think about what inspires me to be in this line of work, I really reflect on the legacy of political art making, looking at the students in Paris, a 1968 uprising, who taught themselves how to screen print in order to plaster the streets of Paris with anti-capitalist messages. The student uprisings at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley, also in the 60s, who were really using creative messaging to reframe the narratives. And of course, the work of Emory Douglas in Oakland and the design he did for the Black Panther Party, someone who continues to collaborate to this day with contemporary artists like Fabiana Rodriguez and Melanie Cervantes. And so several years ago, when Design Action Collective worked on the Black Lives Matter logo, we were able to do so because we had built a team that was deeply in community with folks who were leading that work. So Alicia, Patrice, and Opal were able to come to us, and my coworker Josh, who had worked with them in shared political space in the past, to develop a mark that would help brand, for lack of a better term, the hashtag that was popping off in that moment. And our sister shop at the time, Inkworks Press, a radical printmaker, printed these signs, pretty much almost overnight in order to deliver and distribute this image that could be in the analog world as well, but also as a social media graphic. And this particular sign was used in as window signs. It was a free download for other folks to use. But what we saw is over time, folks were really engaging in this issue. One particular thread of organizing was around Asians for Black Lives. And you can see on the left, a South Asian family who literally just wrote Asians for Black Lives on one of the existing signs that we had originally created. But the affinity group, Asians for Black Lives, evolved both from a political education intention around looking at the model minority myth and our complicity in white supremacy, but also to kind of show up in really accountable ways, and started to create their own version of this graphic. It evolved in the hands of a leaderful movement. On the left, this is an image from Equality Labs. On the right is an image that Micah Bazant created. And this is, again, like South Asians and API communities really leaning into this question of unpacking white supremacy and what it means to be involved in racial justice organizing as a diasporic community. But you can see the yellow and black continues to be this anchor, this kind of visual language that ties us together. Furthermore, there's an anti-imperialist network of organizing projects in the Bay Area called that marches under the banner of Third World Resistance. We originally formed Design Action as a member of this network, as is Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, which Taz and I have both been involved with. And in collaboration with anti-war activism, anti-occupation activism, prison abolition work, we've all been really forming analysis around how internationalism and anti-imperialism has been and continues to be connected with Black Power struggle. And so that's political education for people like me, for our membership, but it's also an opportunity to show up and add that analysis. And in this case, really looking at reclaiming Martin Luther King's radical anti-imperialist legacy. But you can see the, even in specific campaigns like stopping the Urban Shield militarized police training program in Alameda County, that yellow and black keeps coming back. And finally, in the most kind of recent uprisings to defund the police and demands to defund the police, we're still seeing that yellow. And so I share this case study because I'm just really, it's been a real honor to be part of the design process in a movement that has been really championed by so many leaders. And without design action having to hold or control the visual narrative, but help contribute to it in a way that has been just flourishing, and really, and just really excited to see how design has allowed folks to signal to each other that while we're working on very specific campaigns in our respective cities, or we're bringing different perspectives and analysis given our own positionality, we're using the same yellow and the same kind of block lettering to signal to one another that we are part of joint struggle. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sister. I have so many questions about this yellow color, but I'll ask them at the end. Anthony, take it away.
Thank you so much, Taz. And it's obviously a blessing to be speaking after my sister, Sabia, who, you know, it's rough this year because like I'll just randomly bump into Sabia like sometimes like throughout the year, like I'll just be at a restaurant and she'll be like, Anthony, but we always know that we're definitely going to see each other at Netroots. So it's been really hard this year to not be able to embrace my sister and speak to her in person. But what I can say is that, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago when I met Sabia was and just really having this incredible conversation with her about Design Action Collective and her work is when the spark like came into me of like how important you know, art and design is to our movements. Now me, I'm the only person in this planet who might think that I'm a pretty good artist is my 5-year-old son Zahir. Everyone else, like, you know, like, just please don't touch that if they're drawing or designing something. And as a policy analyst and working with grassroots frontline organizations with my organization Climate Justice Alliance, the discussions with Sabia and seeing the incredible work of Design Action Collective, it really took, like, you know, my activism and my policy analysis and organizing to a different level. And I'll always be in debt to my sister for that. Just like to you know, I'll share some slides in a second, but you know, at CJA, our members, we're using a phrase more frequently now called cultural organizing, which is just, you know, an incredible term and study that was really coined by two amazing women, Javiera Benavente and Rebecca Lena Richardson, of talking about how cultural organizing is this intersection of art, culture, and the actual base building and organizing that we have to do if we really want to win. So, you know, through that, and I'm going to share my screen now. Here we go. And let me see, go back some. What we developed at Climate Justice Alliance was something that we call the 5 points of intervention for the changes and the transformations that we want to see, going from a extractive economy to a regenerative economy that protects people, planet, air, land, water, etc. And the 5 points of intervention as depicted here are narrative, base building, organizing, policy development, electoralization and implementation of policy, and then direct action. And what we say is that everything starts with the narrative, and that's why narrative is represented by seeds, and the base building and organizing is nourishing the seeds with the water. And what grows out of that is going to determine, like, the type of direct action, or if we're going to have to take direct action at all. And when you come from the standpoint of the narrative is the seeds, like that's where our roots, you know, come out of, it becomes a lot easier to embrace and really understand the importance of a lot of the work that everyone on this panel does, and the work that I'm most familiar with at Design Action Collective. So as you see here, when we're talking about things like just transition and even our interpretation of a Green New Deal from the frontline perspective, right off the bat, you can see, of course, we're giving props and homage to Black Lives Matter. And when we're talking about building the new and changing the story, it all again goes back to that narrative, and that art and that design is a huge part of that, because it's ours and it's our expression. So therefore, that gives us the ability to change the story. And when we change the story, that's how ultimately you're going to change policy. There's Albert Einstein once said that the revolution introduced me to art, and in turn, art introduced me to the revolution. And I think that you can build off of that as well, in saying that anytime that we're developing new policy, whether it's Green New Deal, whether it's the Breathe Act, the Movement for Black Lives, what we're trying to do is change the story, right? Ultimately, right? Because laws don't change attitudes, attitudes change laws. So that's just like another starting point of, like, we have to change that story visually, how we are depicted as Black, Brown, Indigenous people, how we're depicted as women, right? Like narrative can be totally tainted by the three root causes of the climate crisis: white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonization. And to change the story, we have to even start right with, like, how are people seeing us? So this piece of art, for instance, by an incredible brother named Mike Dowdy out in Philadelphia, called "The Creation of a Racist Cop," and taking that story of creation and depicting it in a way of showing these intersections between, like, some people's face like, whoa. But I'm taking that, you know, of going back, like, how did these cops come about, and the intersection between the apartheid state that we're living in now as Black, brown, and indigenous people, and the slave state that we lived in when the country was stolen from Native folk. More recently, you're seeing this. This is an incredible series that was created by my good friends back in occupied Duwamish territory, where I live in Seattle, in collaboration with one of our most incredible street organizers and activists and policy people, Nikita Oliver, who's incredible. But again, you can see how this is changing a story of, like, you know, violent protesters. No, you know, just very militant people in a principled way, who are not going to allow themselves to be oppressed anymore. And of course, as Abia was saying earlier, like, just this idea of, like, the primary people who are in the streets taking power can be Black and brown, and especially Black women, because we know how important Black women were to the development of the Black radical tradition, which, you know, produced Ella Baker, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Assata Shakur, of course, the great Angela Davis, and Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde. I could go on. Combahee River Collective. I could go on and on and on. So it's, but we lost that, right? Like, the way even we saw some of our women being depicted, that narrative that we have to change, so that our Black, brown, and indigenous women stop being sexualized, right? And really pushing it back against the patriarchy, which helps the development of good, sound policy and getting people behind it. Amplifier, which is a lab, you can see that, like, how this all works, right? And I'll definitely make this available to everybody in the chat and make sure that everyone has access to it, for sure, because I don't want to go too much longer, so we hear from everybody. But you can see this loop of, like, where, you know, art is not just like some small piece or a variable. It is a catalyst for the entire, you know, situation and what that we're trying to change. And when we're working with our community of social change partners, for-profits, nonprofits, you know, we want to build the symbols, the language, and therefore that would distribute the strategies that we want to get to where we want to win. This is the final thing on this slide, also created by Amplifier, because when we're talking about a people who have been so misappropriated, you know, I was just speaking with my good sister, Tara Hauska, who I've been on 2 panels with, about the impact of the NFL team from DC changing their name and therefore changing their mascot. And indigenous people are probably, arguably, if not definitely, the most mascoted people in this nation of stolen lands. So the idea of using art to, like, you know, reclaim, like, this is who we are. You're not going to tell us what we look like, you know, what we sound like. And for people who are amongst the most resilient in the world, obviously, you know, the end of mascotting means, like, this is how we depict ourselves, and we're gonna express ourselves. So this is incredible art that was created by an incredible sister named Jackie Fawn. I would just, like, stop there and stop sharing my screen now, and close by, you know, simply saying that something that I've learned from Climate Justice Alliance members of Story for Center-Based Strategies, who are where Sabia is in the Bay Area. Y'all have so many, like, cool people going on. That's why I don't move there, Sabia, because, like, you don't need me there. Y'all got it holding it down. But the Story for Center-Based Strategies says that, you know, taught me that when it comes to narrative, meaning holds more weight than truth. And we've seen, like, the other side, the so-called right wing, use that adroitly. And that's why it's our turn now. And it really does have an impact on everything that we do. The way we express ourselves, our narrative impacts the policy development, our organizing, our direct action, and everything. And that's why I'm just so honored to be on this panel with these folks who are really lighting the fires, so to say, and getting it together and getting my policy wonks like me to look a lot cooler than I am. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Anthony. There's so much you said that I want to take from your mouth. The Albert Einstein quote I need to get from you later, because that was just gorgeous. That was great. Next up, we have Yash.
Awesome. I think this will be a good segue from Anthony's presentation. So thank you, my brother, for laying down the groundwork of how artists and organizers collaborate and how they become to be. And so let me share my screen real quick. Let's see, hold on. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So again, thank you so much for attending this virtual Netroots gathering. This is, I think, the 5th year we're doing this panel. And so I love meeting new people at Netroots and then seeing all my friends, but most of all, I love learning from my friends here on the panel. I think, we were talking earlier in the practice session that this is, we're all so busy that this is the only time we get to collaborate and come together and really celebrate the work that we're doing. And so again, thank you so much for being here. A little bit about me. The reason I said this would be a good transition from Anthony's presentation is because oftentimes I sort of say I tripped on art, or like I became an artist or a designer or a filmmaker by necessity from my organizing work. And so a couple years ago, I grew up in North Carolina, and where I became a community organizer in the immigrant rights movement. And I used to organize these massive church meetings, and we would be in a town where majority of the town is at this meeting and creating impact in the community, but none of the local press or media makers in that town were there. And so out of sort of creative thinking and creative problem solving, we said, why not just tell our own stories? Why wait for somebody to come and bring a camera or document the stuff that we're doing? Why not just film ourselves? And so my work really came out of that need and sort of started and sparked a career that I'm so grateful to be on now. And so my main focus is in video. I'd love to share 2 pieces with you all today. One that's I worked on a couple years ago, and then one that's a little bit more recent. And so I'd love to share the first video.
Our migration story began before I was born. A young mother, baby boy in her arms, and my father, carrying what little we had left, wading into the swift currents of the Rio Grande and walking endless miles through the blistering desert in search of hope. In Houston, they climbed into the back of a pickup truck, pulled a dusty carpet over their heads, and drove all the way to Chicago, where I was born 6 years later. My parents' relationship didn't survive the hard transition to life in Chicago. My mom became a single mother with 2 kids, and we lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment with no kitchen. I will always remember cooking rice and beans on a hot plate and sitting together on the edge of the bed for our meals. My mother would leave at 5 a.m. on the first bus to get to her job at a warehouse packing frozen foods, and would then head directly to cosmetology school and return home around 11 p.m. I almost never saw my mom during those years. All I had were her goodnight kisses when she got home and laid beside me to sleep for a while before leaving again. In 2013, after many years of hard work, my mother opened her salon. She was worried that nobody would show up, but it filled up on the first day. And after 3 years, her business is thriving. My name is Kathy. I'm 20 years old, and this will be the first year I'm voting in the general election. When I enter the voting booth, I will carry the currents of the river, the heat of the desert, and the dusty carpet with me. In my heart, there will be rice and beans cooking on a hot plate, the goodnight kisses, and the tears on my mother's face the day she turned that key to open her business. I will vote to honor her sacrifices and her triumphs, and those of so many other millions of people like her who came to this country with the dream of a better life and the courage to fight for it.
Awesome. And so, you know, after this experience of becoming a storyteller and sharing stories of our own, any chance I get when a young person comes to me and asks me what they should do in organizing, I always encourage them to become a storyteller, because I think there's just something liberating about being able to take control of your own story and your narrative and tell it in your own means, right? And so for years and years now, I've encouraged people literally with, you know, you can tell your story with your phone, right? And we have all the tools available to you now that makes it so easy. And then, you know, another thing, another case study that I want to share more recently, you know, we're all in this interesting world of the pandemic, and in the middle of that, we had a critical moment in the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so I live in Washington D.C., and just like any other photographer and storyteller would do, I took to the streets because that was sort of the only outlet I felt, because I had spent so much time inside, and so I went out and documented a lot of the work that was happening and the organizing that was happening on the streets. And you know, recently, Q4 last year, I joined an organization called Indivisible. Indivisible is a national movement that organizes chapters around the country, and I run their digital operations. And so this was a critical moment, right? The white-led organizations, white allied organizations needed to figure out what they wanted to do and how they wanted to show up in this space. And because of the privilege I have and the platform I had, I decided to use the art that was happening around the country to do anti-racism work for the base at Indivisible. And so I want to share a video with you all that we created that sort of promotes Juneteenth and all the events that happened in Juneteenth.
I feel a rage this afternoon. A deep, all-consuming rage. One that resists all temptation to show reason, to show mercy, to show compassion. I feel a rage this afternoon. A righteous one. I feel a sadness this afternoon. One that makes me want to run and hide and bury it inside. One that makes me want to scream. This madness that I feel when I walk out the door knowing that death following me on Twitter, that murder is following me on Instagram, that the police is following me in my car, this madness that follows me every day of my life. And I feel a love this afternoon, a strong one that makes me feel whole, one that gives me the shakes, one that makes me feel all good and new and ready again. One that reminds me of magic of a people trafficked across the Atlantic, a love that dances with my rage and slides up real nice on my sadness. I'm talking about a love that overflows, a love that reigns, a love that baptizes, a love that asks, how long did you expect us to stay inside? Why you snuff out our family? Why you gun us down in our bed? Why you starve us? Why you leave us to die in the slums and in the jails and on delivery room floors? I feel a power this afternoon. A power that calls us, a power that pushes us. Is it not true that our uprisings are always overdue? That our rebellions are a great cleansing? Is it not true that our movements are forged in the fire of these moments? I feel ready this afternoon. I feel ready to do what must.
And so, you know, we did a lot of these video pieces around anti-racism work to help our majority white base understand what it means to show up in these spaces and what it means to be a good ally in this moment. And, you know, a lot of times I think about you know, it's not just about the external work that you put out. It's also about the people that you hire to do the work. It's also about the content that you generate, and the content that you source from stock footage. And so the video that you saw, I'm proud to say, that was you know, produced by people of color, shot by people of color, edited by people of color. The voiceover was by a person of color, and you know, all encompassing creating content that represents our community and the voice and the narrative that we want to put out. And then another thing is, oftentimes we get to a point where we make a video piece that's by a person of color, and then we forget about distribution. So one of the things that was important to me at Indivisible and building out my team was that we think about distribution. And so this is a screenshot of what our Instagram feed and grid look like during the BLM uprising and that critical moment. And so we were endorsing candidates that were part of the communities. We were creating video content that, you know, had a goal of educating our base and utilizing our platform. And then I also want to share screenshots of other organizations that weren't doing that. And so I'm sorry for all the other organizations if you're present here, but this is a important educational moment, right? You know, it's when you have staff of color, when you have Black folks on your leadership, or when you have people of color on your leadership, you can see externally how your content shifts very quickly, because as a person of color, when something happens around immigration, you sort of crawl into your own space, and you can't be productive unless you're talking about that thing. And that was the same for Black staff at the organization. And so we decided to make a shift, and it was, you know, I still stand by that call, and I'm proud of the content that we created there. And so, you know, another thing that I'll mention, because of this pandemic, we have shifted the way that we create content, right? The days of people inviting us into their homes to film a video, or showing up to mass rallies and things like that are over for a little bit. And so we have launched new tools and done a lot of research and development over the last few months that I'd love to talk to you about later today, about how we create the same level of content and how we continue to share the narratives that we want to share. So I'll end there, and I know we're close on time, so I'll kick it over to Candace.
Thank you, Yash. That was amazing. There definitely, if you could share the links of the videos, there's a lot of asks for that.
Yeah.
Candace?
Awesome. I'm so excited to be part of this team. It's everybody's so cool. And by cool, I mean like amazing and such great activists, and we do learn from each other. So for those of you in the audience that are in awe of these people, just know that we're in awe of each other too, which is amazing. Okay, so great. So my name's Candace Daiwan. I am the VP of Creative at 50+1 Strategy. So it's really cool about what everyone else is talking about is I'm going to show you a case study about how we've taken a lot of this stuff that, you know, a lot of movements have built, and how I take that and how my creative team takes that to a measure. So we are very, very blessed and fortunate to be chosen to help work on Yes on Measure R in Los Angeles in California. That's this year, March 2020, right before the pandemic really hit. And for those of you that don't know, it was a very, very tough race, but they won. And let me tell you what it's about. So first of all, my job and our job is to take all of this. This is actually what is technically the ballot language, and communicate it to voters. That little paragraph at the bottom left, that is what would be on your ballot. So if you had never heard of this and you just go in and you're going down your list on your ballot, that's actually what you would read. So my entire job can be kind of brought down to the fact that I take something that is very badly designed and I try to communicate it more effectively to people. So what we did was we did a bunch of research, and obviously not every campaign is different. This particular campaign could afford the research, and we did polling, and we also did focus groups. It was really incredible to be a part of all of that. We found the best messages, and don't worry about reading all of this. You can actually, the website's still up. You can go check out voteyesonr.org. And you can see all of these messages, but we found out what the best 3 messages would be. And we also figured out through all of that research what the clear solutions from the actual measure would be for those problems. So obviously you saw that measure earlier. There are tons of information in there. This isn't the only thing that this measure would do. And by far and large, obviously it does a lot more than just these 3 things, but for communication purposes, we had to narrow it down to make it easier for people to understand. We did put the full ballot language on the website. We put the full ballot language everywhere so that the people that did want to read that could. But for the majority of people, they just want to know, how is this going to affect my life? How is this going to affect our city? Also throughout, we were very intentional to use the correct languages that years of advocacy had paved before us. So as an example, we never used the term felon or prisoner, but instead focused on using formerly incarcerated individuals, folks in jail. And there's a lot of resources for this. If you just Google humanizing language and topics, so like humanizing language, HIV survivors, humanizing language, jail, you'll find some really great topics because there's so many other organizations that have done years of groundwork on this, and you should really lean into that. So in focus groups, this was really exciting for me because it was the first time that I actually got to see people see my mailers for the first time. And I'd never seen that. Unless I'm hanging out by the mailboxes when I know that they show up, there's no way that I'd be able to see that. So what's really cool is that we actually got to see what tested in different communities and found out what imagery moved which populations. And so we found the images that moved the most people. So these are the mailers that we publicly put out. This is the first one. And as you can see, it's like pretty striking, but we also didn't want to focus on the face of a sheriff for a lot of different reasons. We also found that real stories from, going back to this first one, we also needed to take the focus off of the incarcerated population for this measure is what we found. And we pointed out who really needed accountability. It wasn't the people that were in the jail. It was the sheriffs that were incarcerating these people that needed the accountability. Real stories from victims' families were very important to share and important for us to put a face on. These are real faces. We did photo shoots and video shoots. It wasn't hard to find real stories of corruption. And after the initial image of the sheriff, we focused on the people their corruption affected. And when you're designing, you have to remember that when you're designing for, you are designing for multiple populations. So some people will be brought in and affected by the story alone. So like the gentleman on the right talking about his son. And some people will see that and they want to know everything else that the measure will do. They want to know who sent this. And we make sure that we put all of that information on there. So you're affecting different populations who are going to read this. We even simplified this further for social to get messages into an easy to share format. So this was for Instagram stories, I believe, and for Facebook, but we put, single facts. This is not the place that we have to say every single thing that the measure does, right? These are separate images that were shared. These are separate images that you could download as a volunteer and share with your network. And on digital platforms, we use both the strong images from before, like the mailers, we turn those into digital ads, but we also use a lot of celebratory images. So what we've also found, and in a lot of psychological studies, and when you have a long fight with such serious subject matter, you have to take the time to celebrate the wins. So whether that is featuring the people that are behind your campaign, featuring the volunteers and thanking volunteers and showing them, showing your volunteers and really focusing on them, or featuring, if you get lucky enough to get some like John Legend endorsing your campaign, go ahead and celebrate that. And so if you notice, the tone is very, very different on these. So that's just one, this is just one example that I wanted to bring up, and it kind of pulls in a lot of, what's really amazing is it pulls in a lot of what everyone has already been talking about. And I'd love to move on to the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Candace. That was amazing. Thank you, everyone. Oh my gosh, I have so many notes and so many things I want to ask. I do see a couple of questions. If folks have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. I had a couple questions I wanted to ask, and then we can open it up. We have about 20 minutes left. I wanted to ask, Candace, you're the Yes on Our campaign that happened right before the elections hit. I'm sure all the BLM stuff, like that Sabiha was mentioning, that happened in the middle of the pandemic. I wanted to talk about kind of how the pandemic because the pandemic has pushed most people into homes except for essential workers, and it's shown us how people has kind of forced people to, you know, like this conference, we're all on Zoom all of a sudden. Like it's forced us to find ways to digitally connect over the internet or connect maybe on TV or whatever, you know, like we're not in person anymore and we're not interacting in person. So I wanted to ask design wise, how have you seen things shift either for the better or for the worse when it comes to design, if that makes sense?
I'll take a first crack at this. One of the things that I noticed, even just talking about everything that I just talked about, is we can't do half of that stuff. There aren't going to be big rallies of volunteers. There aren't going to be election office openings. You know, and we rely on this a lot as far as from the campaign point of view, we rely on a lot of this. We're not going to be able to send professional videographers and producers to homes like Yash was referring to. I think you guys are figuring out some really smart ways. Like I've seen people sending phones and sending, you know, lighting kits and stuff. But I think for the most part, I think we're going to see a lot more stock photos. I think we're going to see less. Even now, I'm finding myself not choosing photos of crowds in a restaurant. And if you do, they have to be like very clearly from the before time. So I think it's this general idea of what images, which is the beginning of a lot of designing, where are we going to get these images? And that's a question that I still haven't 100% answered.
One thing that I've noticed is the kind of requests that folks are sending to Design Action Collective are, of course, shifting to the organization's recalibration around what organizing looks like during this pandemic. But one thing I was really interested in was how we can both be responding to this pandemic and continuing existing campaigns and having them reinforce each other. So in the case of one project we worked on recently with Chinese Progressive Association, which was dealing with xenophobic attacks around within the Chinese community or against the Chinese community in Chinatown and San Francisco, was trying to do their ongoing immigrant rights work, worker protections work, but also needed to push out that material to organize unorganized folks, but also wanted to do direct service support for like everybody needs masks and hand sanitizer and information on how to keep themselves safe, both from racist attacks and from this virus. So we created this mutual aid graphic that was then they printed on masks and on various print collateral, and then kind of developed a whole kit on how to reach their communities that they were already trying to organize around immigrant rights and labor issues through distributing PPE. So that's been just that level of creative thinking really ties to what all of you have talked about with regards to like storytelling and strategy and where our points of intervention are.
Yeah, on that, did you have to do multilingual materials too for CAP?
Yes, that's often Design Action's a challenge in design for the work that we do is we have to make sure it looks really readable and beautiful and eye-catching in multiple languages. And that I feel like having an international team, folks who grew up in other countries, have really helped. For me, who grew up in the United States, has helped me be less like English-centric in the way I design.
Thank you.
And I'll add to that as well a little bit. I think one situation we had at Indivisible was we organized a role summit, and obviously broadband is not great in rural areas in America. And so the pandemic has really highlighted, even if you can get equipment to people in rural areas, how do they connect to the internet to do Zoom or anything that we would like them to join virtually. And so we're coming up with creative ways where we'll send hard drives or things like that, where we'll get footage back a couple of days later for areas that may not be able to do broadcasting of high quality footage. But it's definitely a new challenge that's been highlighted, and like a whole nother like stream of advocacy work that should be created to make sure everyone has broadband access, right? And so yeah, I would definitely, I uplift everything that Candace and Sabia said, but like the broadband access has definitely been a thing that we've been working on.
Broadband access, I feel like that was something we've been organizing for years and years and years on the media justice side of all of this. And no, I mean, I feel like Netroots has been talking about this for years, but no one has really understood the importance until now, when everyone, all these kids are being forced to Zoom to school from home. And yeah, I mean, that's now all of a sudden, I just think that this pandemic has really, really shown us how the weaknesses in our society, and especially when it comes to digital organizing. Anthony, did you have stuff you wanted to add?
I think you just nailed it, Sister Taz. I mean, I think that on the one hand, you know, I had a great conversation with in these Times reporter, she's an incredible reporter, Christine McDonald, just about, you know, what we were like, the disadvantages that we had at this time as it pertains to our organizing, because we're going to be seeing each other in the screens more so in the streets. But I also was like, well, this is also a good time for us to learn how to flex and cultivate our digital organizing muscle and potentially reach a lot more people, you know, than we would with traditional organizing. It's just something that we have to, like, you know, we're going to have to adapt to, especially as Yash was saying, with elections, you know, coming up. We're not just going to like roll over and die. Like, the climate crisis isn't stopping or slowing down because COVID's hitting us, right? The climate crisis is not that benevolent. So I would just say, like, everything that you said, and that this is an incredible time and opportunity for us to really, like, we I mean, look at the people we have on this panel, for instance, and like, if we were all at like Netroots, I would hope that even if it wasn't for COVID, we do have to find a way to outflank the right when it comes to narrative, and certainly when it comes to digital organizing. So I hope we really take this opportunity and seize it.
I have one more question before I go to the questions in the Q&A. I wanted to ask a conversation. I mean, I do this in every panel that I've done with this group. I wanted to ask a question about race and racial justice, and how does racial justice and cultural nuances play into how you both, this is both like, how do you create designs that are culturally competent, but also what's it like being a person of color doing design in, I mean, I know, Candace, you're a consultant. I feel like a lot of you are consulting in these projects, who are maybe working with, either you're working with organizations that might be all white and they want to reach communities of color, or you're working with community of color organizations that want to reach their community. So this is like a multi-layered question, all played into one. All layered into one because we have 10 minutes left for the panel.
Well, I'll just start by saying that I've been struggling with that question often, where when I'm creating something that is for a community that I'm not personally from, how do I hold myself accountable as a media maker, both so that I'm like understanding what biases that I may already have, and also can actively subvert the really harmful prejudices and stereotypes that are so prevalent in the visual landscape that we're all consuming all the time. And so part of that comes from both making sure I'm part of a team that is made up of a lot of different people from many different backgrounds, so that we can kind of help course correct in real time in our creative process. And also making sure that we're always following the leadership of the most impacted folks whenever we're putting something out, so we're not making assumptions about representation and what will play well.
And I can share a little bit here as well. I recently, as of last year, I went from communicating to a majority people of color base to a majority white base. And so it's almost been a change in workflow and change in thought process in my design work and in my media creation work. And I think Savia hit the nail on the head there. I think it's like, it's all about, for me, it's all about surrounding myself around people that share the experiences that we design about or that we create videos on. And, you know, I work at an organization that, you know, speaks to mostly a white base, and our work goes from creating content that wasn't educational and is now fully educational, and sort of starting from square one of what it means to be anti-racist, or what it means to do show up in different spaces and things like that. And so definitely pulling from a lot of research from other movements, and a lot of personal experiences from the team that we've built at the organization. So.
And we also have to know that we will mess up and be able to hear that and not get defensive and try and like repair that harm and rebuild trust so that we can keep moving forward together.
Candace and Anthony, do you have anything to add?
No, I was. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Candace. Sorry about that.
Well, no, I think they said a lot of the great things, like bring in other organizations, make sure that your team is reflective of the communities that you want to communicate with. And if it's not, bring in people like as contractors or as partners. I think that one thing to point out in Yes on R is we never took for granted that we were going to get the Black community to vote for this. Like it's more, and we definitely studied it. Like one of the focus groups, was a Black room. Like it was full of Black women, and I think, other communities as well. But had we just taken that for granted, we wouldn't have studied them, right? We wouldn't have asked them in polling. And I think it's important that, especially for stuff like that, you don't take it for granted and you don't just assume that they're going to vote for it. You have to find out maybe why they wouldn't, or like what messages would resonate with them more. So maybe the question is, obviously Black women have been the base of the Democratic Party, like they're going to show up, but how do you get them? Maybe the question is not how you get them to show up, but how do you get them to show up for a stuffed down ballot, maybe is a better question, right? And I think that's just not taking any communities for granted just because you know that it's going to affect them positively. Like they don't know that. You have to make sure that you tell them that.
So we're coming near the, oh, Anthony, did you want to?
No, I was going to say that everyone nailed it. So yeah, I have nothing to add, just yes.
So we're coming near the end of our panel. We have a couple of questions that maybe we can that are in the Q&A. One is asking about the role of video infographics in digital organizing, which I definitely have seen more video infographics coming up. And the second one is how you think about the strategies for sharing. How are you thinking about strategy around sharing out videos? Which one comes first, the strategy or the content? And let's see, since we have 6 minutes left, if you could include that in your closing remark, that would be great. If you can't answer the questions, answer them. And then let's close this out.
Maybe I can kick us off in the closing since it's video related. Yeah, well, thank you. I think we announced also a second Zoom room. So if anybody wants to stick around, hang out with us, ask other questions, we'll be hanging out in the second Zoom room after this one is over. But thank you all for being here. I think, we have in the pandemic, it may seem like crazy times, but I think I am truly optimistic that we have an amazing opportunity to innovate how we think about video, how we think about digital organizing, how we think about design. And every day in my work, I'm trying to figure out new ways of engaging people through video infographics and digital organizing. We're doing a lot of SMS testing to send video infographics directly to people to use in their relational organizing. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. And then as for the strategy question, I think I'm going to give sort of the organizer answer, but like it really depends on the campaign. A lot of times, like all the BLM work I showed here, the content came first, and we were still figuring out like the role we were playing in the movement. But the content was important to put out, so that way we were making sure people had a good idea of how to speak to their family members about BLM and how to speak to anybody around them because they're stuck in their house all day around what's happening in their country. And so, and then there's other times where the strategy comes first, right? Where we launched a campaign called Protect the Results that's all around if Trump refuses to leave office. And so we've designed a strategy around that first, and now we're figuring out what are the things he can do that we need to create content around. And so it really depends on sort of the moment you're in and the campaign itself.
Quickly, I just, everything's what was just said, like plus one, plus one, plus one. Sometimes, yeah, you do have the strategy first, and we know that we're going to need visuals, but when you have incredible artists in our movement, like these three amazing, well, all of you, who are just driven to create something because they're in these movements, it's not just like an occupation. Sometimes the art gets created first, and out of that, it's like, you know what, we should really build something off of that creativity. So I don't think it's ever an either or. In art and activism never should be either or. As Sister Sabia said, sometimes this has got to be about experimentation. We sometimes get a bit too comfortable, with our tactics, and that's how you get into sort of like collectivism instead of activism. We've got to keep going with that. I would just close by saying that, I just want people to know that the Black Panther Party logo was created by two women, Dorothy Zellner and Ruth Howard, and that was just on a whim. It associated with the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and it became such an incredible symbol that we still use today. The Black Fist, the Black Panther, and that depiction of our power. So, please check out what cultural organizing is. That's what these amazing panelists all actually do, and understand that the cool thing about digital design is that you don't have to draw a straight line. You just have to have a decent computer and an imagination and go for it, because your creations and your imagination is what's going to lead us to the imagination of the world that we want. So thanks, everybody.
Let's definitely keep this conversation going in that Zoom link that Candace posted. Thanks everybody so much for just the time together today. And I'm just reminded of all the different times that something really iconic comes up organically and spur of the moment. And something that doesn't have the staying power took years in the making, but they're all useful. Like, all of that labor is useful in different ways. We'll just perceive it and land it differently. So I invite you all to just keep thinking about where we're all useful.
I'm just going to say bye because I think we only have a few seconds left, and join us in that Zoom room, and always ask yourself why you're doing something when you're asked to, and that'll guide your image.